Evil West's kinetic combat thrills as you dismember vampires by the bucket load, but it's dragged down by level design that's both formulaic and repetitive. Evil West asks a simple question: what if cowboys fought vampires? It's the kind of off-the-wall thinking that gets a Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford movie greenlit, and developer Flying Wild Hog certainly gets a lot of mileage off of this whimsical concept. Set in an alternate version of 1890s America, Evil West is the Wild West at its wildest. A familiar backdrop of swinging door saloons, rolling tumbleweed, and abandoned gold mines are interwoven with Nikola Tesla-inspired electro-steampunk technology, and an assemblage of ravenous bloodsuckers. Evil West shines in the heat of battle when that initial question can be answered, but its strengths are often diminished by the dated design wrapped around them. The story is a fairly by-the-numbers affair, pitting a vampire hunting organization against a vampiric enemy force threatening the continental United States. You're strapped into the spur-clad boots of Jesse Rentier, a typically gruff protagonist with very few emotions beyond mild indifference. His occasionally pragmatic response to the absurdity occurring around him is slightly endearing, but it's telling that I had to look up his name before making this review.
How about that?
The narrative does periodically broach into some interesting themes. For instance, one of the highborn vampires is concerned by humanity's ever-expanding technology and the threat it will pose his fellow bloodsuckers. But these threats never really go anywhere. The only one that does revolves around a smarmy and misogynistic government official, yet his comeuppance isn't as satisfying as it deserves to be. Ultimately, these one-dimension characters and cringeworthy dialogue replete with strained expletives that are easy to ignore.
Eat me!
The story is a little more than a vehicle for its chaotic combat, compelling you from dusty town to murky swamp in research of new monstrosities to extinguish. The most surprising thing about Evil West is that it's more of a brawler than a shooter. The behind-the-back third-person perspective is reminiscent of the most recent God of War games, letting you get up close and personal as you pummel enemies to a bloody pulp. Jesse is equipped with a metal gauntlet that adds extra heft to each punch, while a charged uppercut can be utilized to launch smaller enemies into the air, where you can follow up with a cannonball strike to send them careening into a conveniently placed spike trap or stack of TNT. Jesse's melee strikes feel suitably weighty, and the gratuitous gore that coats each arena in blood and crimson viscera really sells the power fantasy at Evil West's core. Eventually, the gauntlet is infused with electricity, further expanding upon your repertoire with a voltaic variety of new moves. You can pull enemies towards you or you to them, sending bolts coursing through their bones and giving you a short window to lay waste to their helpless husks with a flurry of blows. Most of Evil West's challenge comes from the large number of foes it throws at you at one time, so having this kind of mobility is key to survival, alongside the typical dodge move and a kick that can interrupt certain attacks. There's also an electrical ground pound that evaporates multiple enemies at once, and a shockwave attack that stuns multiple enemies, giving you a brief moment of respite or the opportunity to focus on a specific target while the rest are locked into place. It's not just about the melee fisticuffs either. Jesse is still packing an arsenal of deadly firearms that gradually expands throughout the game. Rather than constantly swapping between weapons on the fly, most of the vampire killing tools are each assigned a button. Pressing shoot on its own will fire Jesse's 6-shooter revolver, while aiming down sights will automatically switch to a rifle for dealing with long-range threats. Another button fires a quick blast from a boomstick shotgun, and there are a few other special weapons that I won't spoil here. There's no ammo to collect, instead everything works on cooldowns. It's a lot to remember, but combat feels both intuitive and fluid. It's the type of game that would benefit from having a combo meter, just to keep track of how proficient you are at slaughtering everything in front of you, but sadly doesn't have one. The enemies you come up against are initially a varied bunch too, from leaping werewolf-like creatures and bulbous humanoids that charge at you before exploding, to bulky shield-bearing foes with leeches for appendages, and creatures that burrow underground when they're not chucking boulders at you. Each one presents a unique challenge, but they also have moments of weakness when executing powerful attacks, indicated by a glowing circle and notable chime. Shooting their weak point with your rifle deals massive damage and produces an oftentimes vital health drop. although the sheer breadth of enemies on screen at any one time does lead to some frustrations when trying to execute techniques such as this. It can be difficult to line up a clear shot when there's so much traffic in the way, and with so much going on, there are some readability issues with knowing when enemies are attacking from blind spots. Despite these issues, Evil West is at its best when it's at its most turbulent. It doesn't take long before mini-bosses are reintroduced as regular enemies, becoming another part of the supernatural furniture. You need to utilize everything at your disposal to survive as you're pelted from all sides with an ever-expanding swath of monstrosities. And it's hard not to smile when emerging from another scrap by the skin of your teeth. Unfortunately, this feeling begins to fade by the time the third act rolls around, and the well of new enemy types dries up. At this point, the game resorts to throwing the same familiar combinations of creatures at you over and over again. There are only so many times you can defeat the same group of shielded opponents before repetition sets in. Part of the problem also lies in Evil West's formulaic design. Combat generally takes place within boxed-in areas denoted by spike traps and TNT. The dull and predictable layout of these areas isn't a significant issue since juggling all of the abilities at your disposal is more than engaging enough, but it's outside of combat where it falters. The main path connecting the game's combat arenas is marked with a glowing silver chain. You can duck under barely hidden side passages to find money that's used to upgrade weapons, but this constitutes the lightest of exploration. Most of the time you're simply moving from one shiny object to another, where you'll then watch Jesse climb up a ledge or squeeze through a gap. It occasionally breaks from the norm, putting you in a perilous minecart ride or impeding your progress with a rudimentary block-pushing puzzle. But these moments are few and far between, and are incredibly mundane anyway. In a lot of ways, Evil West feels like a relic of the past. It's kind of a game you would envision playing back in, say, 2010, or perhaps even earlier. The simplicity could have been somewhat refreshing when so many modern games are overly bloated by comparison, but it comes across like a game short on aspiration. Combat is robust, relishes in gore, and constantly delights with its weighty and satisfying action. It stumbles into tedium towards the end though, both as a result of enemy oversaturation and because it's forced to carry the load. But it's the one aspect that makes Evil West worth playing. The rest of the game is formulaic and mind-numbingly dull, actively diminishing its high points as you saunter from one combat arena to another. I didn't always enjoy my time with Evil West, but I hope a sequel is in the pipeline, if only to see Flying Wild Hog expand and improve on its promise.